think the next stage will be how do you make it real time. I think this will happen this year.
How would you solve the emotion part, the emotional part? You speak Polish, I speak Russian, but we speak English, so we can do it. But if we say our parents are here, they will not be able to talk.
Yes.
When will be that moment when two different people with different languages will be able to talk without any language barrier?
Such a great question. You might have heard about part of why we started ElevenLabs, which was so close to exactly that of like when you watch more recent Polish, all the voices, whether it's male or female, are narrated with just one character, one person, which kind of loses that original emotion, tonality, original content. So something that we, of course, would love to change. And as you think about the technology, we already are seeing that it can preserve a lot of the voice, some of the emotion intonation. Translation is a little bit harder. That, I think, in itself is already showing incredible promise today. Like it's possible with some of the use cases. I think the next stage will be how do you make it real time so that you can actually stream that content, whether it's in media or in the other aspects. I think this will happen this year. In the next stage, ideally you have some device, let's say it's a headphone or some other device like a mobile phone, where you can speak and it live translates to the other person. Earpod is good because you can, while you speak, the other person can listen, so it can stream at the same time. But to make it, I think, really adopted at scale, it will need to be a little bit smaller models and a little bit quicker. My guess is the next 2-3 years, we'll see some of that being out there, and hopefully in the next 5, it will be something that everybody can use anywhere in the world.
I'm very excited about that. I think it's super needed. But I went to CES this year and I tried a couple of these devices. They don't really work yet. So my newsletter is about machine learning and artificial intelligence, so it's quite technical audience. If you can tell me what technical challenges do you have to solve before it's possible?
Of course. I don't know if you are familiar also with the Hitchhiker's Guide to Galaxy and the Babelfish. I think that's exactly where that's going to head. So would love to be part of making this happen. But currently the process is like 3-step process. You do the speech to text, so you'll try to understand what somebody says. But beyond just the speech, ideally in the future what you would do is you understand who is saying it. If you have many people, you can diarize it and understand it. So speaker diarization needs to be there. You need to understand the emotions with which speech is being generated. This problem is still how
do you understand emotions?
Exactly. Like there's so few data that will have the speech and text, but also the metadata of how something was said. So I think that's a barrier of how do you create that at scale with high quality, and something that we are working on. So speech to text is the first part. Then you need the LLM part, or it could be other models, but LLM probably will be the best solution, where you translate it from one language to another. But now the important thing is that you of course want to preserve some of the original meaning, and depending on how much of the sentence you take, that meaning might be different. If you have 2 sentences and one might be explained in the other one, then the meaning and the way you should deliver it will be very different. So you can have a sentence, what a wonderful day. Okay, the translation is easy. But if you had what a wonderful day, I said sarcastically, completely different and different elements. So there's a LLM in the middle. And of course, a wider set of phrases that people might need to explain. And then you have the text to speech step at the end, which also needs to take the emotion and the voice from the original, needs to be able to recreate that on the other side. And depending on the use case, ideally in the same or similar length. So it feels a little bit more seamless. So you have those 3 steps: speech to text, LLM, text to speech. Where I think the space is today, LLM on the translation, for some use cases, like a more flat deliveries, it's good. But for a lot of other ones where you have a lot of niche words or phrases, harder. I think speech to text is mostly a good spot for understanding speech. We released our model recently that also beat all the benchmarks, which we're very happy about. Scribe.
I saw your post.
And of course that helped lower that barrier, but of course still you will have a long tail of other languages that will be harder. And the emotion thing, it needs to get fixed, which isn't yet. And the text to speech I think is very good, but still will need more of the context understanding from the speaker.
How would you solve the emotion for the emotional part?
The first step would be to just create a very large data set. And we work with voice coaches and people to effectively create larger set of audio that then you annotate of how you say things.
Right.
So even in our conversation, let's say somebody would take that sample and then say, in this sentence, the emotionality is excited, calm, and the speaker stutters every so often. And that would help, of course, to have a lot of those examples that then you can hopefully have in the model to understand new unseen examples as well. So that's the main blocker. And of course, then you might have different languages, and different languages might have a different description. Whether this is like, can you rely on the same technology to translate it? That's unknown, but yeah, that's an interesting one.
In your conversational AI, which combines
Yes.
STT, LLMs, and TSS, on what percentage, on what level you achieved what we were talking about?
I think for some use cases, I think it's there. I think for some use cases, it can really help. And maybe to speak for some concrete examples, we work with a company in the US called Hippocratic, which is automating some of the work that nurses need to do around the patient appointments that they don't have time for. So like calling them to ask about how they're feeling, remind them about taking medicine, schedule appointments. And that works. That is something that is possible. And, here, the same people on the other side frequently aren't an active mobile phone, like text user. So that's perfect for them to be able to reach it. And I think we are there. And that's just, of course, English to English. Then we have this other company on customer support side called ElevenLabs, where people are calling in a language A, but the responders only understand language B, and they need to live translate it. And it works. It works very well because people wouldn't have any way of reaching the other person before. So they would literally need to hang up. And now they can translate the content. What they cannot do yet is translate all of the emotions in the same pattern. But in the customer support use case of this one, that wasn't the first barrier. So these work very well. Now, there were places where it doesn't work so well is kind of that variation of the first question that you asked, like the real-time dubbing or real-time translation element. We are working with some of the media companies where you would want to have a broadcast of a sports, and then you can hear it in one, and then of course the listener has in the other one. But given there's so many different names that are hard to pronounce, the ambience and the emotions of the commentator are the hardest that they can be. You need a little bit of the barrier there. I think we are there. So let's say, I think for a lot of like call center, customer support, AI, healthcare, education use case, we are there. We're seeing real use cases being deployed. And now whether it's going to be just a time of like scaling that across, I think I will see more of like the conversational AI agents and the use cases which have like a highly emotional dependency, whether it's across the real-time AI dubbing or whether it's just a conversation. I think that will be in the next 12 to 18 months.
That's incredible. How hard was it to do this dubbing with the Lex Fridman podcast?
It was pretty hard, given we wanted to make sure that every word, every sentence is translated in the right way.
It sounded incredible. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. It was also like given our beginning and the mission of actually making and then being able to work with such an incredible person like Lex and the others and seeing that deployed to such a broad audience, that was felt very close to heart when we were able to do it. But here we did spend a lot of the QA/QC time, both on the translation to make sure it's perfect. Some of the external parties were coming in to help us also on that, and on audio as well. Like we of course want to make sure that the way that the leaders spoke were represented in the same way. So we would listen side by side, the previous and the new, compare them. And of course, the hard thing with podcasts that are distributed on YouTube or others is the length needs to be the same. So even if one language is much longer than the other one, you still need to keep the length the same. So you end up trying to use the original sentence. You need to maybe paraphrase it a little bit. And only when you paraphrase it, then you generate the audio on the other side. But of course, now from the original, you have like a longer content, different emotions. They paraphrased it. How do you do that? Very, very hard. Like I don't remember the exact number, but I think English to Spanish is 30 or 40% longer when spoken. So if you need to keep the length the same, it's hard. Also, something where like the conversations that Lex has, If we are able to do them one day semi-automatically or fully automatically, now it's semi-future full, it will be a good proof point that the technology is like really there. It's like a good stress test for us.
So it took you a day?
It took us longer than a day. I think it took us, depending on the podcast, between a week or 2 weeks. The hardest part was translation, where we worked with another party to do that perfectly. And then translation in context of audio. So you not need to translate, but you need to translate and keep the length. So translation and then the iterations on translation and length, that was the total longest step. Just the audio part and generating great voice was relatively easier, but then generating great voice with the emotions in that time, much harder.
Wow. No, I thought it was very bold to go for it.
Thank you. I don't know if you know, I think 3 years ago, I was reading your work, Turing, and I think I even tried to reach out.
You did.
Yeah.
And I reached out to you this December, replying to your message on LinkedIn,
Okay.
asking for your predictions, but you didn't reply to me.
Okay, I maybe I can still do that.
Yeah, we'll do it next year. But let's do this current situation. Someone walks in and that's noise. How do you deal with that in the conversational AI?
We have a pretty good model that's trying to, based on the volume of somebody speaking, based on the context of what was said before, try to use the text like, is it a real interruption or a fake interruption? Like somebody speaks and speaks to it. It works pretty well. It's not a bulletproof solution. The bulletproof solution that we think will be one of the examples in the future is that you effectively, let's say I'm speaking to an agent, based on the first sentences that I say, then I encode the voice, and then I check for that voice, which would be a lot more. But then, of course, you have different use cases. Sometimes you might want to have few people in conversing. So, like what we are thinking is, you will have effectively ability to set it up when you have an agent. Do I set it up that auto detect the speaker and then customize the agent responses just to the speaker? So let's say it's Sonia speaking, then it detects that it's your voice based on the sample of what you said. And then in the next responses, it checks, okay, is that still the same voice that said the things before? Just by comparing the embedding. If we do it quickly enough, then you can just effectively continue speaking. And if it like detects another speaker and speaker embedding, it processes it. It's like, is it the same? No, let's continue with you before interrupting. The real challenge is like, how do you make it quick enough so you do it still seamless? But we think we can do that. It's something that some, especially in like noisy environments, some are requesting with our work, and I think we'll ship it probably in the next quarter, so Q2.
Amazing.
Which would help. And of course, sometimes you might prefer to have like not auto assigned to one speaker, but have like plenty.
Yeah.
Then we will keep it broader.
How's the latency? Did you solve this problem?
Current latency is like end to end. So with everything, with network, with interruptions, with ending, from one response to another is between a second to 1.2, depending on the region, 1.2 seconds. So very quick.
Yeah, that's not bad.
Just like text to speech, which is the part of generating from text to audio, that we have the quickest model out there, which is 70 milliseconds. Then the transcription in LLM is where it takes time. But the main thing is, of course, when do you interrupt? Is the do I interrupt when the person stops speaking? Maybe they will continue their sentence. So we have behind the scenes in our conversational framework, we have like a number of smart mechanisms from detecting whether based on the context, it's a natural end of the sentence. Is there enough of the silence that followed? We combine all of these signals together and only then generate a response. But while we do all those detections, we already pre-generate some of the LLM part so we could stream it much quicker. So that's why it's like end to end, it's so quick and it feels natural, while at the same time, which, there's the alternative of that solution, and if I'm going too far, stop me as well. But the alternative to that solution would be to do like a true multimodal experience where you train those three models together. But if you do that, then you lose some of the control you have if you do that three-step solution. Because now you have the LM, you want to make sure that it stays on the topic that's relevant.
Right.
That it doesn't go off the rails, especially in customer support or healthcare. You need to make sure that it says what you want it to say. So that's what is important there. And all those checks that need to happen might also introduce additional latency. Well, of course, in the multimodal, you will not have as much stability, but you will have more naturalness and quicker conversation. We are also working on that at the same time, but from the research aspect, But for like big enterprise companies, the first solution is usually the best and what we recommend.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask about it because I thought the next step for conversational AI and like combining that technologies would be getting something multimodal at some point.
At some point, for some use cases where emotionality will be so important, or like the real connection, we think this will be the case in the next year or two. And maybe like to make it more specific, in the interactions where you don't maybe need to take an action on the other side, like issue a refund or issue a cancellation, then the multimodal experience will be potentially more useful. Of course, you still want to be careful. Like, say you wouldn't want a therapist to be the multimodal if you are not like 100% make clear that it works all the time and there are right safeguards. And you can hallucinate every so often with responses both on the text and audio level. It's a little bit less stable. But in the long term, in the next, let's say, 3 to 5 years, there'll be more of the stability and a lot of proof points that multimodal is potential way to go for those use cases. And then we will see that happening. But in the current form, the 3-step solution gives you kind of the pieces that are valuable. Exactly.
Yeah.
Like it's scalable, it works, it's emotional. You can build your knowledge base into the agents and do it relatively simply.
You started as a research first company. How deep are you still involved in technical stuff?
Me personally or company?
Yeah, you personally.
Much less. It's definitely one thing where it does come to us still as a company. So maybe to speak through my co-founder is incredible. He's the genius and the brain behind all of the models that we've done. He was able to assemble some of the best researchers in our team and audio space. So now we have like a very strong audio research team that like keeps crashing the incredible models and benchmarks out there. So we still do and will do for the next years audio research, and we want to build the models that will be the frontier and the best models, whether it's text to speech, speech to text, conversational agents, or whether it's other aspects of audio understanding or audio generation. That will definitely continue. On the personal side, what I still do and what we really believe in is that beyond research, you really need the product aspect and like what's the end-to-end solution for the customers.
Right.
Like it's not enough to have text-to-speech model that has good narration, but you also need, for example, a product or workflow that allows you to do an entire audiobook or create an entire voice agentic experience, bring your knowledge base, bring the functions that might interact with your life. So I'm pretty close to that aspect. And of course, as we think about deploying that technology to clients, one thing that we do maybe less traditionally is that we have engineers that will work directly with the clients to try to understand what they need, what's their process, what's their exactly, and then build that solution closer there.
Do you miss being more involved in research?
So I was never involved like in the research, but some of the product aspects of like building the product itself, and especially back in my previous company, the company as part of Palantir, I used to be much closer in like pipelines and working with the clients on the optimization problems. In some parts of that, I definitely miss like especially the mathematics or some of the kind of the engineering thinking that was involved.
Right.
But still, the thing that stays true, which I love about my current job, is I still work a lot with clients. I speak a lot with them, try to understand the problem, try to understand what's the solution we can do, which ultimately then feeds back into how do we build the product aspect. And while I don't do any coding myself now, it's still nice to be able to see how it can be deployed across.
Congrats on your recent huge round. Just recently, you had a collaboration with Lex Fridman. This week, you had partnership with Google Cloud. ElevenLabs seems to be everywhere. Like, what is your strategy? And going back to when you reached out to me back then, I saw that this like was such a strategic move to work with the newsletters. So, what is your strategy? One
thing that we are trying to stay true is to really understand what is the problem that we are trying to fix and how we can build a solution around that. But the other piece that really comes here is that even if you know what the problem is and you found a solution, still most of the world or most of the customers don't know about that. So the big question is like, how do you tell them that the technology is there to finally fix those issues? And given we started with research and built a lot of the research, people don't really trust or believe that you will say like this is the best human-like model or this is the most emotional model. And we are looking for ways to show the wider world, not by just saying, but actually showing that exactly the use cases in real life. So instead of telling, like show but not tell, one of the part of the strategy was let's open the technology to creators, to developers, to use that in their use cases to show what's possible. And in the process, even we were learning of like things that we didn't even know were possible. So it was like both ways was good. But also part of that strategy was we think the research is such a high quality. We know that there are clear problems that this is fixing, from narration of audiobooks and newsletters through to dubbing of podcasts to creating voiceovers for movies, all the way to agents. But the way to show that to the world was and is working with the creators, the developers, the innovators that then show the use cases in the breadth. And at the same time, work with some of the biggest companies in this space to go deep, understand the scale and security, exactly the compliance that's needed. Like last week, we also were proud to announce our partnership with Deutsche Telekom, which is like completely different angle. But part of the reason we are excited for that partnership is that they already seen how the podcasts and how people can engage with the voices in the calls and see that the quality is there. And what we now are focusing is like, how can we go even deeper and fix that end to end? And that's kind of how we're thinking about it. On one side, provide access and wider access to the best of the technology we can. On the other, go very deep with a very specific end-to-end solution for the enterprise.
You have research, you have this product, everyone loves you, but you never open sourced anything. Why? And now you're going to.
Initially, we're thinking about this. Currently, given we've spent so much time doing our research, doing something that others weren't focusing on, to speak frankly, we would give a lot of the advantage and IP that we have to others to recreate it. And this will change, of course, when we build more of the product. And of course, over last 2 years, we added a lot of that product layer, but we still are relatively early in where we would like it to be. When we feel like we have the right set of parameters around the product, then we will be happily giving access to research to strengthen even further the mission. But today, given the time and effort we are putting, we want to stay close and not give that advantage to the competition, which frequently has much more resources.
There's a lot of competitors.
And like, big companies are potentially like from some of the hyperscalers, they will enter that space at some point. So at some point we will give the access, but for now it's more about building the
also part of the strategy.
Yes.
So probably the last question, is the problem of dubbing in Poland solved?
I think we are in a good direction, not solved yet, but I think in the next, it's one is solving the research, another one is solving and letting the world know and that solution is there. That's where we spend lots of time working with those companies, and I think in the next years, single digit, and I think 2 or 3 years, it will be solved.
That would be incredible. Yeah.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you.